Hello, class. This is the recorded lecture for stats, and we're going to do section 2.1 right now, which is starting to show you how to display data in a very logical way. Most of these will be displaying data via some pictures like bar graphs and pie charts, which are by far the two most popular and the easiest to read. And we'll show you some other ones throughout this chapter as well. My opinion, less important, but sometimes there's good reasons to do a few other of these displaying data. So what we're going to start with is this idea of constructing frequency distribution, which is basically making a table. And we're talking about qualitative data, but you can do it in quantitative data as well. That was what I typically did with regard to that. And then we'll talk about the two most important displays of graphs, which are the bar charts or bar graphs and pie charts. So to get started, a couple definitions. Frequency of a category is the number of times that it actually occurs. And so when you're doing this analysis, you kind of have to count them up. I'm going to show you with regard using a spreadsheet, which will help you do the counting as well as we go throughout the semester. And actually in this lecture will be the first introduction of a spreadsheet. And then the frequency distribution will be putting this in a table that presents each category and how many times it occurs. So let's go through an example that's actually in the book, and then I'll go through an example that I did and show it to you using an Excel spreadsheet. So here's the one that I took right out of the book, and this gives you an example of 50 customers that a retailer tallied up of what kind of credit card that they use. You might not think this is important, but if you own a business, every time a customer uses a credit card, you have to pay the credit card company a small percentage of each one of the transactions. The worst one is American Express, which what I mean by worst, it's the highest of the fees that they charge. And depending on what other kind of MasterCard and Visa you use, the fees vary. Ones where you get airline miles or cash back, those fees are higher than just the regular old Visa or MasterCard. Be that as it may, with regards to doing this, well, we have how many different credit cards? Looks like we have MasterCard, Visa, Discover, American Express. So we have 4 categories. And then the question is, how many times does this occur? Well, unfortunately, unless we put this in the spreadsheet and did a little sort, there's really no easy way to do that besides count them all up. And if you did that, this would be your answer. And so this is a way to get it into a frequency distribution chart. Categories is typically in the first column, and frequency is typically in the second column. And you could see that these are the number of times each one of these credit cards were used in taking the data for those 50. And so if you add up the frequency column, you should get the number 50, or you've done something wrong. So that's always a good check. So our first calculation is the calculation of relative frequency. And this is another word for the percentage of each one of these occurring. If you take the relative frequency and multiply it by 100, you would get relative percentage. But so as you could see that we need the sum of all the frequencies. So that would be the sum of all the occurrences. In this case, it was 50 credit cards. And the frequency would be the number of times that credit card actually was used. And so typically, again, we put this in a table format. And what you do, it's a fraction. So each one of these has to be a number between 0 and 1. If it occurs 0 times, it would be 0. If it was the whole thing, then it would be 1. And you could see it's a fraction where the denominator is always the total. In this case, there were 50 credit cards that were sampled. And so you can see those fractions. When you put them in a spreadsheet and display them, you typically display them in a decimal format. And sometimes you'll even display it in a percentage format. In this case, this book deals with the decimal format, so I'll follow that process as well. So that's really it with regards to that first part of it. So here's a problem that I got out of a different book that I've taught out of, and this shows you constructing a frequency distribution where there were 35 boys where they did a sample of when the boys stopped growing. And the ages were between ages 10 and ages 18. And so you can see that list. And again, what you have to do is you have to take that list and you have to count them all up. And so you could see that the number 10 only occurs once. It was, oops, it's right there. You can see that number 11 occurs twice, right there, and so on and so forth. And again, when you add up the total number of boys in that column, you should get 35, or you missed one. So that's, again, a good check. So what I'd like to show you now is let's take a look at the Excel spreadsheet here. And so now we're going to do the calculation using the spreadsheet. And a lot of the times you'll be able to just cut and paste the information typically right out of the problem that you're doing. You'll see what's really nice about ALEKS. And I've been getting a little bit happier with it the more I've been playing with it. They actually, a lot of the problems give you a link where it downloads the data to a spreadsheet for you. So it does all that work for you as well. And I'll show you that a little bit later. So what do we have here? Well, we have the two columns retyped. And so the first thing that you would want to do is you want to make sure that this column adds up to 35. And so a very useful function is up here. And we're going to be using this a lot. And if you click on this, this is where all the mathematical and statistical functions that you will find. And you can see average is right there, which is the mean, which we'll be talking about shortly. But here we want to add up that whole column, and that would be the sum. So the way that I typically do it is I'll highlight that column that I want to add up, and then you click on this and you hit sum, and you see you get the sum of 35. So again, you don't have to get your calculator out and do all those calculations. So what's nice about this is that if you wanted to do the relative frequency, oops, can't spell very well. Probably why I became an engineering mathematician. And so basically you could let the program or the spreadsheet do the math for you, which is really nice. So the strategy is you'd want 1 divided by 35. So let me show you a couple ways to do this. The best way to do this is to hit the equal sign. And when you do that, when you're in a cell of a spreadsheet, it indicates you're going to generate a formula. And what's cool about this is that if you click on that cell, like for the number 1, hopefully you can see it says B4 there. That's the cell identification, and it brings that number 1 over. And then what we're going to do is we're going to divide by 35, right? And so let's just type 35 in there. And out comes a number. And I've set this column up where it rounds it to 3 decimal points, but you can do it to whatever ALEKS is asking you to do so you can see those values. And so this one would be equals, say, 2 divided by 35. As I clicked on that cell, you can see how that works. Now, here's the beauty of the spreadsheet, is especially if you use these cell indicators in these formulas, If you copy this formula and then highlight this and then right click, and you're going to get all these variable pastings. The first one is pasting the formulas. And what's really cool about that is the spreadsheet is smart enough to know that when you go to column 6, you're going to use this cell. When you go to column 7, you're going to use that cell, and so on and so forth. So you can see that when you look at that, it does all the calculations for you. So it happens quite quickly. So the last thing that I do want to point out is that this relative frequency, if you add them all up, it always equals the number 1. So again, let's double check that. So if we highlight those and go back to our function key up here and hit sum, you can see when you add those up, it should equal 1. And if you think about a relative frequency or a relative percentage, it should, all those together should add up to 1. Or if you were talking about percentage, 1 equals 100%. Okay, so that's the first part of this section. I'm going to stop the recording and we're going to talk about bar charts and pie charts in the next recording.